Dante wrote, "The path to paradise begins in hell." Join Deacon Prendergast and David Fortin as they discuss the tools men need to build the domestic church and the spiritual weapons to defend it. This is Through the Fire.
Deacon, we're back. What are you eating, by the way? What are you eating, by the way?
No, you don't want to know.
What are you eating?
Sour Patch Kids.
You're a kid at heart. So, hey, there are so many different chapters to each person's life. You know, we start out single, we get into a relationship, become engaged, and our boundaries, they kind of change throughout our lives.
Well, different responsibilities come up. Life is not one static line. Mm-hmm. The adventure that is life is peaks and valleys, twists and turns. And so we have to be flexible and recognize that as circumstances change, our particular priorities need to be focused in a little bit better.
So would you agree with me that, and this goes back to what our show last week about friendship, it's so important for guys to have another guy to be able to bounce those boundaries off of, to make sure that you're not, swinging too far to one side and having a wall, and like I brought up in the last segment, or allowing just anything in. It's so important that we have role models and guides in our lives. Would you agree?
Well, this is why, I agree completely. We have to understand how to properly discern what's happening in front of us. And this goes back to what I was saying last week, as far as having a good friend. One of the criteria that Jordan Peterson talks about is a good friend will not tolerate your cynicism and destructiveness. If you're going down a path and you're behaving in a way that is not healthy for you, you need somebody that's going to tell you got some food stuck in your teeth and you look like a crazy person. Just pull the stuff out and let's move forward.
Right.
You need somebody that's going to tell you got a booger hanging out of your nose, and you're not going to get angry with them, but you're going to say thank you because I don't want to be walking around like that.
Right.
We need somebody in our lives that's going to tell us you're going too far. Mm-hmm. I care about you too much. You're going too far. Reel it back in. And so, we have to have people in our lives that we trust, that we give permission to, because it's a true friendship and there's loyalty there. And this is why, like I said last week, it's important for us to understand that a friendship has to be centered around virtue.
Right.
Because we want the best for the other person.
Yeah, boundaries. I think what we're talking about with these boundaries is we have to be vulnerable to let those people in. We have to be vulnerable to possibly be hurt by them.
Yes. So here's something, let me just say this in regards to what you're talking about as far as vulnerability and boundaries. St. Ignatius of Loyola, in his spiritual exercises, speaks an awful lot about consolation, desolation. Mm-hmm. And I think I've mentioned this in previous shows. We need to understand and we need to be able to discern. We need to be able to discern that which is a consolation and that which is a desolation. We need to be able to discern that which is good for us and our friends and our family and for society, as compared to that which is not good for us, our friends, our family, and society. So there are absolute supernatural boundaries that God has placed on the universe. This is why the argument, as crazy as it sounds, but nonetheless, this is why the argument of my choice, my body, the pro-abortion argument, does not work, because killing human life indiscriminately because it interferes with how you want to live, that's not good for society. That's not good for humanity. And so there are absolute boundaries. There are supernatural boundaries. There are natural boundaries. There are boundaries that we put on friendships. If you have a friend, and I've had friends in the past that would fit into this category. If you have a friend who is engaging in self-destructive behavior, if you have a friend who, no matter how many times you pour yourself out in love, they refuse to listen. They refuse to respect. Maybe they mock and make fun of you and say, oh, you're just a Bible beating, blah, 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 blah. You know, there's going to be boundaries on the friendship where it's like, I can't do for you, you have to do for yourself. You know, we see this in Alcoholics Anonymous. We see this in every recovery. There's data on this. Every recovery program that is in existence, they all have the same data. And the data says, unless there is a profound intervention and change through faith and religion, there's going to be a relapse. It's not as common as you would think that simply by going through the rehab program and not developing a relationship with God, that's going to be fine. It's just not true.
You got to have that desire.
You have to realize it's like, you know, I'm accountable to God, and I can continue to behave and live like an idiot and hurt people around me. But the people around me that I'm behaving badly towards, why should I expect them to stick around? Why? Why should I? Why should I expect them to make themselves available to receive more pain from me? Why? Why should I expect them to do that?
I often say that our path to salvation is not so much about location as it is direction. And I think as long as those people see that the direction that you're trying to get to, that makes a difference.
Well, the opening to our show, when Dante talks about the path to heaven begins in hell, you know, there's a lot of truth in that. Some of the most profound conversion stories are those individuals who have just ruined everything for themselves and came to a realization that it's true. All of it is true. There is a God. I'm not it. I'm not God, but I need God, because left to myself, I will destroy everything. And some of the people that have profoundly experienced that conversion, they did, you know, in a very real way, they did find themselves in hell. And sometimes, you know, for some people, that's what they need. Some people, they need that. They need to recognize that they need to lose everything. Some people need to be alone. They need to feel the pain of being alone in order for them to recognize what they're destroying around them. But on the other hand, God doesn't want you to be a victim. God does not want you to be brutalized. God wants you to be loved. And so in some instances, there may not be an option. You have to stick around. And we even have some examples of that with the saints. You know, I want to say it was St. Bridget, who we have St. Bridget's cross, which is made out of straw. I think she was brutalized.
Of Ireland.
You know, we go back in history, and a lot of women have been brutalized simply because the men that were around them just physically overcame them, and they were enslaved. I mean, in a very real sense, they were enslaved. Sometimes even in their own homes, they were enslaved. But, you know, we live in a modern society where there are options and there needs to be boundaries. There are ways of finding shelter. And so there is an option, even for those who don't believe that there is. You know, there is an option to find shelter so that you're not brutalized. You know, so, you know, it goes back to what I've said in the previous segment. When we live by our faith, when we recognize how Jesus wants us to live and how we are to be treated, and we understand how to discern, and, you know, I mentioned consolation, desolation. I just want to mention this in regards to that. We have to be very, very careful when we discern, because what the devil will do very frequently, the devil will take something that's a desolation and a very destructive desolation, but yet wrap around that desolation a consolation, something that appears to be very, very good. A perfect example of this is wealth. Perfect example is wealth. And so you see people in Hollywood, you see people in the music industry, you see people in corporate America, A great example is the movie. I think the movie is called Wall Street with the character Gordon Gekko.
Yep.
And he has that speech, greed is good.
Yep.
No, it's not. Greed is one of the capital sins. Greed is a deadly sin. But we live in a society that believes that greed is good. Money is good. Oh, no, it's great. Don't worry, but we need to make more money. Do you know what we can do if we make more money? It's like, yeah, I know what you can do even if you don't have any money. And I also know that if you orient your life towards God and building up the kingdom and you're faithful to that, God will use you the way he needs you to be used. It may mean that you find financial wealth. It may mean that you find financial poverty. And both are okay because it's all about serving him. Boundaries, we have to understand, even when it comes to, we're supposed to be stewards of what we possess. Because after all, none of it is ours. Everything that we have, everything that we hold dear to us, all of our possessions, guess what? We're not taking any of that stuff with us when we die. Every bit of, this is an interesting exercise. For whoever is listening to this, I want you to take a few minutes and I want you to walk through your house or your apartment or wherever you're living. I want you to survey all that you see as part of your possessions. I want you to look at all of it. Pay particular attention to the things that you possess that you find great value in. And after you do, I want you to look at it all and come to the realization that none of it is going with you to heaven. Or, to be more precise, none of it is going with you to the grave. Whether it's heaven, hell, purgatory, none of it is coming with you. In fact, a good portion of it is probably going to end up in a landfill. That's just a sad truth. A good portion of what you possess is probably going to end up in a landfill. Eventually, it's going to end up in a dumpster, be sold off, be given to relatives after you die. Maybe some of them will find some sentimental value in it. But the vast majority of what all of us possess, all of us, the vast majority of it will end up in a landfill.
It's funny. I just saw a video, one of the short videos on YouTube, and it was talking about celebrities that had taken things to the grave with them. And I think it was Bob Marley that took a guitar with him. And it is no earthly good anymore.
No.
So it just speaks to what you're saying. You work in the mental health industry.
Are you trying to say that I'm mental?
Well, you got me as a friend.
Yes, I do. I work with troubled inner city youth, and I'm studying for a graduate degree in mental health counseling.
How much would you say mental health and boundaries, how much do they come together? And are unhealthy boundaries a source of mental health or mental illness?
So what I will not say is I will not offer a clinical perspective because it would be inappropriate for me to offer a clinical perspective, especially since I haven't graduated yet. But what I will say is part of my training a long, long time ago was hospital chaplaincy. And I've completed one unit of clinical pastoral education. And I remember I was working in a level 1 trauma hospital in New York and Westchester Medical Center. And I remember we were having a conversation, and one of the conversation amongst all the chaplains that came up repeatedly, and I believe this to be true, it was stated that every mental health issue, every mental health problem has an accompanying spiritual deficit. Every mental health issue or problem or condition has with it a spiritual deficit. And now we just, when we had this conversation, I think I might have been the only Catholic in the room. So I was surrounded by a variety of Protestant chaplains. But what came to my attention over and over and over again was the power and the influence of the sacrament of reconciliation. So if we think about counseling, what is counseling? Well, you have a problem you go to a counselor with your problem. What's the first thing you do when you sit down with the counselor? Well, you confess. You confess what your problem is. Why are you here? What brings you into the office today?
Yep.
Well, I've got this going on. So it's a confession. It's a kind of confession. I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling anxious, whatever it might be. I'm having problems in my marriage. I'm having problems with my children. I'm having problems with my parents, whatever it is, work. And so it's a kind of confession. And so what ends up happening next? Well, the counselor is going to do a kind of diagnosis. The counselor is going to be thinking to himself, here's what I see. And we're going to figure it out together, but here's what I see. Well, you get the same thing in the sacrament of reconciliation, in the confessional. You say to the priest, Father, bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been however many weeks or months since your last confession. This is what I've done. This is what I'm confessing. And the priest then is listening, and the priest says, well, this is what I'm hearing. Mm-hmm. That, you're speaking to me about this sin, about that sin, about this problem. And it's the same thing as going to a counseling. And then just as the counselor would offer a treatment plan, here's what I think you need to do, or here's what we need to talk about, or here's the homework that I'm going to give you, or however the counselor is going to say it. This is what I'd like for us to talk about and dig deeper on. The priest does the same thing. Mm-hmm. You've shared with me your sins, and so this is what I'm hearing. And based on what you're sharing with me, it sounds to me like it's coming from this root concern. And so this is what I'd like you to consider. Some of the best confessions that I've been to, the penance portion of the confession is supposed to be a starting point. It's supposed to be a launching pad. The idea of penance in the confessional has a whole lot more to do with giving you tools to work with to get you back on track of living a holy life, not necessarily punishment, like, go pray the rosary 100 times. Penance is not supposed to be punitive. It's supposed to be restorative. Counseling is the same way. You go to the counselor, and the counselor gives you homework to do. I want you to do this thought chart, or I want you to, experiment with this. It's not supposed to be punitive. It's supposed to be restorative. And then what happens? You go back. And either you're going back and you're repeating the same confession that you did the last time to the priest, just like you may be talking to the counselor and telling the counselor, here's what worked, here's what didn't work, and here's how I feel today. And so the idea really is to bring about this reconciliation. And all of this is regards to the boundary question, right? Because all of this is supposed to create a structure. What are boundaries? Boundaries are a structure. We talk about boundaries. Dave, you're a land surveyor. You talk about property boundaries. What the heck is the point of a property boundary other than to know I'm supposed to stay here. I'm not supposed to go there.
Right.
Okay. And, and likewise, we have guardrails on highways. Okay. What's the point of a guardrail? What's the point of the paint on the road on the highways? I'm supposed to drive here. I'm not supposed to drive there. And then God creates boundaries for us also. And we have the sacraments to help us stay within boundaries.
Just so you know, they're not called guardrails anymore.
What are they called?
They're called guide rails.
Guide rails.
Guide rails. Do you know why?
No, I have no idea.
Because somebody actually went over the guide rail, and a lawyer sued and said that it was supposed to stop someone. So they call it a guide rail now. And that's really what, some of the things in our lives is guide rails, because we could go off the edge.
Well, you make a good point. I mean, everyone is, we are all, through our free will, we are all afforded the opportunity to sin if we want, and to ignore the guide rails that the church has given us.
Yep.
We could do that. We could choose to do that. I highly recommend that we don't. But, There's a lot of people out there that, so it's funny. As you're talking about this, I'm reminded of a pastor that I had many, many, many years ago. And he talked about sin. And he talked about, the idea of the difference between venial sins and mortal sins. And he talked about the notion of how some people will play around right on the edge of the fence between sin and not sinning. They're just pushing it to the limits.
Yep.
And that is not a good way to live our lives. We've all done stupid things in our life. We've all pushed the limits. We've all behaved in ways that we should not be behaving. If we're going to live a virtuous life, then we have to understand that we are meant to notice where the guide rails are, but not to touch it. I mean, it's like, okay, for those of you that have grown up around electric fences, those of you that have grown up or, in agriculture or in farming, that electric fences, they give off a pulse. It's not a steady stream of electricity. It's a pulse. Yeah, it's not a good idea to play the game of maybe I'll touch it in between pulses because you're going to get zapped. And if we're going to play that game, it's going to come back to bite us. So the same is true with the supernatural and living a life of virtue versus vice. So it's better to just not play the game.
Deacon, as you're talking, I'm thinking about the episodes that we did on the ordinary works of the devil. And
Yes.
And it seems like all those tactics that the devil uses to try to fuddle us, they're all to collapse both our spiritual and our corporeal boundaries.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. Here's a great, very cliche, but it's an easy one that comes to mind. You think of the businessman that's traveling, right? He's married, he's got maybe a couple of kids at home, and he's traveling while he's on business. And so here he is in the hotel room, and he's got nothing going on for the rest of the night, nothing at all. And there's a restaurant and a lounge in the hotel. And he figures, let me just go hang out in the lounge. Maybe there's some jazz playing or whatever. And he's down in the lounge and he gets hit on by a woman. What do you do? Where do you go with that? Do you abandon everything and take her back up to the room? Do you say to yourself, well, I'm not going to do that because I'm married, so I'm not going to commit adultery? But then you allow yourself to flirtatiously play. Even though nothing physical occurs, in your mind, a lot has occurred. Or do you decide, all right, I'm not going to pay attention to her. And then you get back up to the hotel room and you find yourself clicking on the TV, and the temptation now is to watch pornography.
Right.
Or
worse.
Or do you decide, I'm not going to go down to the lounge. I'm not going to put the TV on. I'm away from my wife. I know my weaknesses. I know my sinful inclinations. And I'm going to pray the rosary, call my wife, say goodnight, and go to sleep. It's a matter of choice, and the boundaries that we're talking about are internal. They're supernatural. We can choose to see them. We see the danger. We talk about guide rails on the highway. Well, you're not going to have a guide rail where a danger does not exist.
Good point.
So the guide rail will appear where the danger exists. You check yourself into a hotel, you see the hotel has a restaurant and lounge area with a bar or whatever. Okay. Now you know where the danger exists because you know your nature. So it's just a matter of choices. It's just a matter of choices. We have to be aware that this is who we are, how we live. I am a devout Catholic Christian man. I'm a devout Catholic Christian woman. And there are relationship obligations that I have. There are sacramental obligations that I have. There are communal relationships and obligations that I have, and I will live a virtuous life. Might I mistake? Might I fall every once in a while and make a mistake? It might happen. But thank God that we have a way to come back home. Well, lastly, one of the things that I want to do is I want to talk about influence. And we've talked about this, I think, in previous shows. When we, as a people, exert our influence in society, we get rid of this nonsense of public self, private self. There's only self. When we influence society through how we choose to behave, we bring about change. And that change could be good or bad. For example, how many of us remember many, many, many years ago when stores were not open on Sunday? How many of us remember many, many years ago something known as blue light laws, where you could not buy alcohol on Sunday? How many of us have heard of the story of the history behind the McDonald's Filet-O-Fish sandwich, which I think I've mentioned in the past, but if not, I'll mention it now.
No, we talked about that with Eric Meyer.
Well, that's right, yeah. So if those of you that missed that show, here's a great example of how we Catholics can influence society. Back in the, I don't know, the 50s or something like that, late 40s, 50s, whatever it was, McDonald's. There was a McDonald's franchise in Ohio, and they were noticing that on Fridays, their hamburger sales went down significantly. Couldn't figure it out why. And they finally figured out the reason why is because Catholics don't eat meat on Fridays. And so because of that, they created the Filet-O-Fish sandwich. Now, Second Vatican Council changed all of that. But nevertheless, when we live who we are, both at home and in public, we make a difference, both supernaturally for ourselves and our family, as well as corporally in society.
Deacon, we got to leave it there, man.
Okay.
Hey, and friends, don't forget to check us out at www.castingthe.net, where you can find all our shows from the past and some stuff about us going forward in the future. So for Deacon Don Prendergast, I'm David Fortin. We'll see you next week.
The preceding program was a Spirit of Truth Radio Arts original program for castingthe.net.